This is the Food for Thought podcast with your host, Jack. Let's begin.
This is Food for Thought, Season 2, Episode 4. Are we living in days of prophecy? Welcome back to Food for Thought. I'm your host, Jack. Today we're diving into a topic that honestly, a lot of people have been thinking about lately, whether they admit it openly or not. Are we living in the last days? Or maybe a better way to ask this question is, are we living in days of prophecy? Now, right away, I want to say something important. This episode is not going to be one of those panic driven, the world ends next Tuesday at 4 p.m. conversations. We're not going to do that ever. Because history is full of people who tried to predict exact dates, decode every world event, or identify every politician as the Antichrist. And most of that has aged terribly. And honestly, I think a lot of people are tired of fear based Christianity anyway. I know I am. So this episode is not about fear, it's not about hysteria. And it's definitely not about pretending we know things man was never meant to know. Jesus himself said in Matthew 24:36, "But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only." Still, I think it's fair to say something feels different about the world today. And even people who aren't religious seem to feel it. Something feels accelerated, some things feel unstable, something feels noisy, something feels spiritually exhausted. You look around and you see wars, political division, economic anxiety, social fragmentation, loneliness. You see AI exploding onto the scene, people arguing constantly online, information everywhere, wisdom seemingly nowhere. And a lot of people are quietly asking themselves, what exactly is happening to the world? Now, personally, I think one of the most fascinating verses connected to this discussion comes from the book of Daniel. Daniel 12:4 says, "But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase." That phrase has always stood out to me. Knowledge shall increase. Because if we're being honest, knowledge has absolutely exploded. We have access to more information than any generation in human history. You can pull out your phone right now and instantly access libraries, talk to someone across the world, generate images with AI, study theology, learn physics, watch documentaries, read real world events, and translate languages. It's honestly incredible. And yet, at the same time, people seem more confused than ever, more anxious, more divided, more distracted, and more overwhelmed. So maybe the real question isn't simply whether knowledge has increased, keeping in line with Daniel 12:4. Maybe the real question is, has wisdom increased with it? Because those are not the same thing. And honestly, I think that may be one of the defining struggles of our age. So that's where we're headed today. We're going to talk about prophecy, the last days, Matthew 24, Daniel, Proverbs, wisdom, technology, AI, distraction, and what it actually means to live wisely in a world overflowing with information. And I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation. Segment 1: Why so many people feel something is wrong. One thing that's undeniable is that modern life feels psychologically overwhelming. For most of human history, people lived relatively local lives. You knew your village, you knew your family, you knew your local problems. Now, the average person wakes up and immediately absorbs wars from another continent, economic panic, political outrage, celebrity scandals, AI breakthroughs, natural disasters, ideological conflict, social media arguments, conspiracy theories, and fear based headlines, all before breakfast. The human nervous system was not designed to process the emotional weight of the entire world simultaneously. And because of this, many people in a constant low level state of anxiety. Now, add to that the incredible speed of technological change. Artificial intelligence is advancing rapidly. Jobs are changing. Human interaction is changing. Attention spans are collapsing. Truth itself often feels difficult to identify. For many people, the modern world feels spiritually disorienting. And when societies become unstable or confusing, people naturally begin asking bigger questions. Where is history heading? What is happening to humanity? Are we progressing or unraveling? This is often where biblical prophecy answers the conversation, because the Bible contains passages that describe deception, moral decline, instability, lawlessness, spiritual confusion, increasing wickedness, and expectations surrounding the future. One of the most commonly referenced passages is Matthew 24, which we will discuss next. Segment 2: Matthew 24 and the signs of the times. In Matthew 24, Jesus is speaking with his disciples about future events. The disciples ask him, "Tell us, when will these things be? What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" That's Matthew 24:3. And Jesus responds with a series of warnings and descriptions. One of the first things he says is incredibly important. Take heed that no one deceives you. That's from Matthew 24:4. Notice that before wars, before disasters, and before upheavals, Jesus begins with deception. That's fascinating if you think about it, because deception is not merely about being lied to, it's about losing the ability to discern truth. And if we're honest, many people today feel overwhelmed by competing narratives. Everyone claims to possess the truth. Everyone is claiming authority. Everyone claims certainty. And yet, confusion seems to increase. Jesus continues, and you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. That's from Matthew 24:6. I think that line is very important. The end is not yet. In other words, Turmoil alone does not prove that the end has arrived. Human history has always contained violence, suffering, instability, and fear. The Roman Empire collapsed. The Black Death devastated Europe. World wars shook entire civilizations. The Cold War brought humanity close to nuclear catastrophe. Every generation has experienced moments that felt apocalyptic. That perspective matters. Jesus goes on. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. Matthew 24:7. And then later on, in Matthew 24:12, and because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. Now, that verse is particularly striking. The love of many will grow cold. Many people today describe society as increasingly angry, cynical, divided, isolated, and emotionally numb. People are connected digitally, yet often disconnected relationally. And perhaps one reason good conversations are becoming rare is because sustained attention is becoming rare. We spoke about this in the last episode. Good conversations require patience, presence, listening, and humility. And modern life constantly trains us toward distraction. Let's move on to segment 3, Daniel and the increase of knowledge. Now, this brings us to one of the most discussed prophetic verses in the Bible, Daniel 12:4. It reads thusly: But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and the knowledge shall increase. Okay, that phrase, knowledge shall increase, has fascinated people for generations. Now, different people interpret this differently. Some believe it refers specifically to prophetic understanding. Others believe it refers more broadly to human knowledge and advancement. But regardless of the interpretation, it is impossible to ignore the astonishing explosion of information in the modern world, paralleled in Daniel 12:4. Think about this. A person today can access more information in a few seconds on a smartphone than many ancient civilizations accumulated over centuries. We can instantly communicate globally, access libraries, translate languages, generate images, create music, use artificial intelligence, and study virtually any subject online. Knowledge has undeniably increased, but this raises an uncomfortable question. Has wisdom increased with it? Because those are not the same thing. And this may be where the modern world is deeply confused. We often assume that more information automatically produces better human beings. But history does not support that idea. Human beings can become technologically advanced while remaining morally, spiritually, and emotionally immature. We can create powerful tools without developing the wisdom necessary to use them responsibly. And honestly, I think that may describe much of modern civilization. Segment 4, Knowledge versus Wisdom. This is where the book of Proverbs becomes incredibly relevant. Because Proverbs constantly makes distinctions between things we often lump together: knowledge, wisdom, understanding, and discernment. And biblically speaking, they are not the same thing. That matters. Because modern culture often treats intelligence as the highest virtue, but Scripture does not. Proverbs 1:7 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction." Okay, notice something interesting here. The verse doesn't say knowledge is bad. Knowledge matters. Knowledge is the awareness of truth. It's information, it's learning, it's facts. Knowledge asks, what is true? And obviously, knowledge has value. Without knowledge, we remain ignorant. But the Bible also recognizes something modern society often forgets. A person can possess enormous amounts of information and still live foolishly, which is where wisdom enters the picture. Wisdom is different. Wisdom is not merely knowing facts. Wisdom is knowing how to live rightly. Wisdom asks, what should I do with what I know? Or even, how should I live? That's why Proverbs 4:7 says, wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore, get wisdom. And in all you're getting, get understanding. That verse feels incredibly relevant today. Because we live in a culture obsessed with acquiring information, we celebrate speed, innovation, productivity, influence, technological advancement, and constant connectivity. But wisdom develops slowly. Wisdom requires humility, reflection, patience, correction, self awareness, moral grounding, and experience. And honestly, wisdom is uncomfortable in a culture addicted to speed. We've become very good at consuming information. I'm not sure we've become equally good at processing it wisely. Then there's understanding. Okay, biblically, understanding goes deeper than raw information. Understanding is the ability to connect the meaning, to perceive what lies beneath the surface. Knowledge gathers facts. Understanding asks, what does this mean? And that's incredibly important today because people are constantly absorbing information without always understanding its deeper implications. We know more, but do we actually understand ourselves better? Do we understand human nature, or meaning, or purpose, suffering, morality, truth? That's a very different question. And finally, discernment. Discernment may be one of the most important virtues for the modern world. Discernment is the ability to distinguish truth from error, wisdom from foolishness, manipulation from honesty, what is good from what merely appears good. Discernment asks, what should I trust? Or maybe, what is really happening here? And honestly, In an age of algorithms, outrage, misinformation, propaganda, endless opinions, AI generated content, and emotional manipulation, discernment becomes absolutely essential. So when the book of Proverbs talks about wisdom, it's talking about something far deeper than intelligence. It's talking about character, judgment, humility, moral clarity, self control, and spiritual maturity. And maybe this is where modern society feels increasingly unstable because information has exploded, but wisdom has not necessarily kept pace. Today, people consume endless amounts of information and yet still struggle deeply with anxiety, loneliness, identity, discipline, purpose, relationships, and meaning, which suggests something important. Information alone cannot save us. And then there's this remarkable verse from Ecclesiastes: For in much wisdom is much grief, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. That's Ecclesiastes 1:18. Now that verse is not condemning knowledge. It's recognizing something profoundly human. The more aware we become of the world, the heavier life can sometimes feel. And maybe that explains why so many people today feel mentally exhausted. We are constantly absorbing bad news, outrage, tragedy, comparison, conflict, and information overload, day after day after day. And many people today are drowning in information while starving for wisdom. And maybe that's one of the defining spiritual crises of our age. Segment 5: The Last Days and the Human Heart. Another important passage is found in 2 Timothy 3. Paul writes, But know this, that in the last days perilous times will come. That's 2 Timothy 3:1. Then he begins describing human behavior. For men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud. And he continues, unloving, unforgiving, without self control, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. What's fascinating is that Paul focuses less on technology and more on character. That's important because when many people think about prophecy, they focus almost entirely on external events. But scripture repeatedly returns to the condition of the human heart: selfishness, pride, greed, deception, moral confusion, spiritual emptiness. In many ways, the crisis described in the Bible is not merely political or technological, it is spiritual. And that matters because technological advancement cannot solve spiritual problems. Technology can increase convenience, it can increase communication, it can increase efficiency, but it cannot automatically produce virtue, wisdom, love, peace, humility, and meaning. And sometimes modern society seems to assume that scientific advancement alone will eventually solve the deepest problems of humanity. But human history repeatedly shows otherwise. Because the central human struggle is not merely informational, it is moral, it is spiritual. Segment 6: The danger of fear and obsession. Now, I also think it's important to address something else. There is a danger in becoming obsessed with prophecy. Throughout history, some people have become consumed with predicting dates or decoding headlines, fear based speculation, conspiracy obsession, and sensationalism. And ironically, this often produces anxiety rather than wisdom. Again, Jesus said, "But of that day and hour no one knows." That's Matthew 24:36. That should produce humility, not arrogance. And perhaps one of the healthiest approaches to prophecy is this: remain watchful and thoughtful, remain spiritually awake, but do not become consumed by fear, because fear can distort judgment. And fear based thinking often leads people away from wisdom rather than toward it. The Bible repeatedly encourages discernment, vigilance, faithfulness, endurance, and wisdom. Not panic, not hysteria, and not obsession. Okay, segment 7: The attention crisis and spiritual stillness. I also think there's another dimension to all of this. Modern life has become incredibly noisy. Most people rarely experience silence anymore. There is always music, podcasts, television, notifications, scrolling, messaging, stimulation. Many people even feel uncomfortable being alone with their own thoughts. And this may connect directly to wisdom, because wisdom requires reflection. Wisdom requires stillness. Wisdom requires the ability to think deeply rather than react instantly. Proverbs 3 5 to 7 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding." That verse calls for humility, and humility is increasingly rare in an age where everyone feels pressure to appear certain about everything. But wise people understand human limitation. Wise people understand that knowledge has boundaries. Wise people remain teachable. And perhaps one reason wisdom feels scarce today is because constant distraction prevents contemplation. We have become experts at consuming information, but many people no longer know how to meditate on truth. And there is a big difference between the two. Segment 8: What if the real crisis is wisdom? Okay, so let's step back and ask the deeper question that we have been building towards. What if the defining issue of our age is not merely technical acceleration, but spiritual and moral confusion? What if the real danger is not simply that knowledge has increased, but that wisdom has not kept pace. Because humanity now possesses tools of enormous power: artificial intelligence, biotechnology, global communication, mass influence, psychological manipulation, algorithmic persuasion. And these tools can be used for tremendous good, but they can also amplify deception, addiction, vanity, division, manipulation, confusion. And in other words, technology often magnifies the human heart. And if the human heart lacks wisdom, the consequences become dangerous. This is why the book of Proverbs matters. This is why discernment matters. This is why spiritual maturity matters. Because wisdom is not obsolete. In many ways, wisdom has never been more necessary. Segment 9. How should we live? So, where does this leave us? Are we living in prophetic times? Maybe. Perhaps every generation experiences shadows or echoes of these realities. But maybe the more important question is this: how should we live? Because, regardless of where we stand in history, Scripture consistently calls people toward wisdom, faithfulness, discernment, humility, love, truth, and endurance. Not panic, not despair, and not obsession. Micah 6:8 says, He has shown you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God? That remains relevant in every age, whether the world is stable or unstable, whether knowledge increases or not, whether history accelerates or slows. And perhaps the challenge of modern life is learning how to remain spiritually grounded in an age of distraction, to remain thoughtful in an age of outrage, to remain wise in an age of overflowing information. Okay, so here's my closing reflection. Perhaps the question is not only whether we are living in the last days, as Daniel 12:4 suggests. Perhaps the deeper question is whether we are living wisely in the days we have been given. Maybe the greatest problem of our age isn't that knowledge has increased. Maybe it's that wisdom hasn't kept pace. We've learned how to build powerful machines, but many people are still struggling to understand themselves, still struggling to find peace, still struggling to know what is true, still struggling to live wisely. And maybe that's the real challenge of every generation. Not simply learning more, but learning how to live. Thank you for listening to Food for Thought. If this conversation got you thinking, good. Share your thoughts below. I'd love to know what you have to say. Maybe share this episode with someone who is asking the same questions. Hit the subscribe, like, and notification buttons below to stay up to date and help keep us going. And remember what I always say: question what you know, challenge what you believe, and see where the truth takes you. Until next time, keep thinking deeply.
Our journey continues, step by step in time. Let's walk this road together, yours and mine.